Hi, this is Mr. Wharton. I'm back with a second video on how to complete the square when you're going to deal with radicals for quadratics level 13. And this one is going to deal with situations where you might have a negative lead coefficient. And depending on how long this goes, I might squeeze in the other ones, or I'll put that in a third video. But here's what we're going to do. I'm going to work through this one, and then I'm going to encourage you to try the second one. If you feel like you can work through the first one, you should do that and pause the video and see if you can figure it out. It's all going to be similar steps. There's just going to be one extra piece. Okay. So first thing to do is isolate. And I'm going to call this step 1A now. And you want to isolate the x squared and x terms. And now we're going to have a 1B. And that's going to be divide all terms by the lead coefficient. That's the x squared coefficient, the number that's multiplied times x squared, if it is not positive 1. Okay. Now, if there's nothing in front of the x squared, then it's positive 1. But if there's a negative, then there's a negative 1 in front of it. So in our case down here, this has a negative 1. So that's a negative 1. But we don't generally write it. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start working through this. So my first step is to isolate the x squared and x terms. So I'm going to do that by adding 5 to both sides. That'll be right there. We'll copy that and simplify it. 11 plus 5 will be 16, and negative 5 plus 5 is nothing. Now is where I need to deal with part 1A, which is get rid of this negative. And the way you get rid of a negative is you multiply everything by negative 1, or you just divide everything by negative 1. Divide this by negative 1. Okay, and the shortcut for that is just to change the sign of all things that are here. So when I do that, this just becomes positive x squared. This becomes negative 16x. And this over here becomes negative 16. Now, what we're going to deal with at the next step is we're going to, now that we've taken care of 1A and 1B, and we no longer have something wonky in front of the x squared, we're going to do step 2, which is to have the middle coefficient, have the x coefficient, and square that, and add that square of half of that coefficient to both sides. So let's take care of that now. So we're going to take negative 16, we're going to take half of it, and we're going to square that. And we're going to do that in 2 places. We're going to do it on both sides to keep the equation true. Okay, now we start tidying up. On the negative 16 over 2 is just negative 8. So I'm going to turn that into a negative 8. On the left side, I'm going to actually leave that there and not resolve the squaring. On the right side, I've got to resolve the squaring. The squaring makes negative 8 times negative 8 is positive 64. Please remember that a negative times a negative is a positive. And then we will simplify one more stage. Negative 16 plus 64 is going to be positive 48. And now we're ready for step 3, which is to factor the left side. So the left side becomes x minus 8. That's the usefulness of keeping this here. It reminds me that it's going to be x minus 8. Okay, and that's going to be squared. And I did something weird with parentheses, but there we go. We are good. X minus 8 squared. Now we're on to step 4, which is get the square root of both sides. Square root of x minus 8 squared equals the square root of 48. And there's going to be a plus and a minus version of that. Okay, let's resolve things. The square root of x minus 8 squared is just x minus 8. And now our fifth step is to simplify things and solve for x. So, of course, that's going to be a plus version, and it's going to be a minus version. But 48 is something that contains a perfect square. 48 is 3 times 16. So that's 3 times 16. And 16, if you didn't notice it, it's at least 4 times 12, and then 12 is 4 times 3. So 16, so you'd be able to find it if you started playing around with the factors. So 16, we can get outside of square root jail, and the square root of 16 is going to be 4. So we'll put that there. And we'll do it on this one as well, the negative version. So x minus 8 now equals positive 4 root 3 and negative 4 root 3, which is how you can say that, and people will understand you when you say that. So now we need to isolate x, solve for x, and it's a one-step problem. We just need to add 8 to both sides. So I'll do that. So x will equal 8 plus 4 square root of 3, and x will equal 8 minus 4 square root of 3. And we are done. Oops, that's not a 4. That should be a 3. We are done with that one. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn those off, and I would like you to take a look at the next one. Negative x squared minus 22x plus 4 equals 5, and see if you can work that one out. I'll come back down to it after I clean all this stuff up. Okay. I just want to remove distractions from the graph. You can turn those on if you wish. I will be sharing this Desmos with you. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and see if you can follow the steps. Remember the first step being isolate the x squared and the x terms by moving the constant term to the other side using algebraic tools. That does not mean just put a 4 over. That means move it over using algebraic terms. Then step 1b is to divide everything by any coefficient of x squared that is not 1. And then step 2 is add the square of half the x coefficient to both sides, and then factor the left side, and then get the square root of both sides, and finally simplify the square root if possible, and solve for x. Okay, so hopefully you have paused the video and you've tried this, and I will now walk through my approach. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides to do step 1a. Okay, so that's just going to be a 1 over there, and that just is nothing. So I've got negative x squared minus 22x on the left, and now I want to factor a negative 1 out of everything. To do that, I just can change the sign of everything in here. So that becomes plus, that becomes plus, and that becomes a minus 1. Now we go to step 2, where we're going to add half of 22 squared to both sides. So plus 22 over 2 squared. Okay, and then we simplify things. 22 over 2 is 11. So I'm going to leave that as it is there. This is going to be 11 squared, and we'll square 11, which will be 121. And we'll put that together. That becomes negative 1 plus 121 becomes 120. Okay, now we're on to the step where we get where we factor the left side. So the left side is going to become x plus 11 squared, because that is a perfect square. Plus 11 squared. And then we go to the square rooting step. Okay, square root of that, and square root of 120, and that's a plus or minus square root. Now, once again, there are some perfect squares hiding in 120 that we'll find. We'll root them out. Okay, so Let's deal with that in a second. So on the left side, I'll end up with x plus 11. On the right side, I'm going to have plus square root of 120, and x plus 11 equals minus the square root of 120. Now we've got the step where we need to simplify the radical and solve for x. So I'm going to do the simplifying the radical. 120 is 4 times 30. Now we won't find any more perfect squares inside of 30, but 4 is a perfect square, so we can get its square root and move it out there and put in a 2 there. We'll be able to do the exact same thing here. So we got x plus 11 equals 2 root 30 and negative 2 root 30, so plus and minus versions. And now we can subtract 11 from both sides, so we get minus 11 plus 2 square root of 30, and I'll just copy that because it's going to be negative 11 minus 2 square root of 30. And you're done with that. I think that's a good place for us to stop this video, and then I will do another one with with things like 2s and 6s in front of everything. All right, I hope that was helpful.